World's greatest emperor Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Shivaji Bansal was an Indian warrior king. Shivaji carved out an enclave from the declining Adilshahi Sultanate of Bijapur that formed the genesis of the Maratha Empire. In 1674, he was formally crowned as the Chatrapati of his realm at Raigad. Over the course of his life, Shivaji engaged in both alliances and hostilities with the Mughal Empire, Sultanate of Golconda, and Sultanate of Bijapur, as well as the English, Portuguese, and French colonial powers. Shivaji's military forces expanded the Maratha sphere of influence, capturing and building forts, and forming a Maratha navy. Shivaji established a competent and progressive civil rule with well-structured administrative organizations. He revived ancient Hindu political traditions and court conventions and promoted the usage of Marathi and Sanskrit, rather than Persian, in court and administration. Shivaji's legacy was to vary by observer and time, but he began to take on increased importance with the emergence of the Indian independence movement, as many elevated him as a proto-nationalist and hero of the Hindus. Particularly in Maharashtra, debates over his history and role have engendered great passion and sometimes even violence, as disparate groups have sought to characterize him and his legacy. Early life. Shivaji was born in the hill fort of Shivneri, near the city of Junner in what is now Pune district on the 6th of April 1627 or the 19th of February 1630. Shivaji was named after a local deity, the goddess Shivai. Shivaji's father Shahaji Bansal was a Maratha general who served the Deccan Sultanates. His mother was Jijabai, the daughter of Lakhuji Jadavrao of Sindikt, a Mughal-aligned Sardar claiming descent from a Yadav royal family of Devagiri. At the time of Shivaji's birth, power in Deccan was shared by three Islamic sultanates, Bijapur, Ahmednagar, and Golconda. Shahaji often changed his loyalty between the Nizamshahi of Ahmednagar, the Adilshah of Bijapur and the Mughals, but always kept his Jagiir fiefdom at Pune and his small army with him. Upbringing. Shivaji was devoted to his mother Jijabai. He studied the two great Hindu epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. These were to influence his lifelong defense of Hindu values. Throughout his life he was deeply interested in religious teachings, and regularly sought the company of Hindu and Sufi saints. Shahaji, meanwhile, had married a second wife, Tukabai, from the Mohite family. Having made peace with the Mughals, ceding them 6 forts, he went to serve the Sultanate of Bijapur. He moved Shivaji and Jijabai from Shivneri to Pune and left them in the care of his Jagiir, a state administrator. Shivaji as a boy was a keen outdoorsman and, though he received little formal education and most likely could neither read nor write, he is said to have possessed considerable erudition. Shivaji drew his earliest trusted comrades and later a large number of his soldiers from the Maval region, including Yesaji Kank, Suryaji Kakade, Baji Pasalkar, Baji Prabhu Deshpande and Tanaji Malusare. Shivaji wandered the hills and forests of the Sahyadri range with his Mavala friends, gaining skills and familiarity with the land that would prove useful in his military career. Shivaji's association with the Maval comrades and his independent spirit did not sit well with Dadoji, who complained to Shahaji to no avail in making him compliant. In 1638, Shahaji took Bangalore from the Mughals, and was permanently posted there by Bijapur. Shivaji was taken to Bangalore where he, his elder brother Sambhaji and his half-brother Enkoji were further formally trained. He married Sabai from the prominent Nimbakar family in 1640. Around 1645–46, the teenage Shivaji first expressed his concept for Hindavi Swarajya, Hindu self-rule, in a letter to Dadaji Naras Prabhu. Conflict with Bijapur. In 1645, the 15-year-old Shivaji bribed or persuaded the Bijapuri commander of the Torna fort, Anayat Khan, to hand over the possession of the fort to him. The Maratha Farangoji Narsala, who held the Shakan fort, professed his loyalty to Shivaji, and the fort of Khandana was acquired by bribing the Bijapuri governor. On the 25th of July 1648, Shahaji was imprisoned by Baji Ghorpade under the orders of Bijapuri ruler Muhammad Adilshah, in a bid to contain Shivaji. Accounts vary, with some saying Shahaji was conditionally released in 1649 after the capture of Ginji secured the Bijapuri's position in Karnataka, others saying he was imprisoned until 1653 or 1655. During this period Shivaji maintained a low profile. Since his father's release was conditional, from 1649–1655 Shivaji paused in his conquests and quietly consolidated his gains. After his release, Shahaji retired from public life, and died around 1664–1665 in a hunting accident. Following his father's release, Shivaji resumed raiding, and in 1656, under controversial circumstances, killed Raja Chandarao Moore, a fellow Maratha feudatory of Bijapur, and seized from him the valley of Javali. Combat with Afzal Khan. Adil Shah was displeased at his losses to Shivaji's forces, which his vassal Shahaji disavowed. Having ended his conflict with the Mughals and having more ability to respond, in 1657 Adil Shah sent Afzal Khan, an experienced and veteran general, to arrest Shivaji. The Bijapuri forces marched into the Maratha-held Konkan, despoiling the shrine of the goddess Bhavani and other Hindu holy sites. Pursued by Bijapuri forces, Shivaji retreated to Pratapgarh fort, where many of his colleagues pressed him to surrender, his position being untenable. The two forces found themselves at a stalemate, with Shivaji unable to break the siege, while Afzal Khan, having a powerful cavalry but lacking siege equipment, was unable to take the fort. To break the impasse after 2 months, Afzal Khan sent an envoy to Shivaji suggesting the two leaders meet in private outside the fort to parley. The two met in a hut at the foothills of Pratapgarh fort on the 10th of November 1659. The arrangements had dictated that each come armed only with a sword, and attended by one follower. Shivaji, either suspecting Afzal Khan would arrest or attack him or secretly planning to attack, wore armor beneath his clothes, concealed a bog-knocked metal tiger claw on his left arm, and had a dagger in his right hand. Afzal Khan hugged Shivaji Maharaj and struck the first blow, and after that Shivaji Maharaj blow tiger claw inside Ahal Khan's stomach. Shivaji Maharaj bravely killed powerful Afzal Khan and then fired a cannon to signal his hidden troops to launch the assault on the Bijapuris. In the ensuing Battle of Pratapgarh fought on the 10th of November 1659, Shivaji's forces decisively defeated the Bijapur Sultanate's forces. More than 3,000 soldiers of the Bijapur army were killed and 2 sons of Afzal Khan and 2 Maratha chiefs were taken as prisoners. Siege of Panhala. Having defeated the Bijapuri forces sent against him, Shivaji's army pressed into the Konkan and Kolhapur, seizing Panhala fort, and defeating Bijapuri forces sent against them under Rustam Zaman and Faisal Khan in 1659. In 1660, Adil Shah sent his general Siddhi Jauhar to attack Shivaji's southern border, in alliance with the Mughals who planned to attack from the north. At that time, Shivaji was encamped at Panhala fort with his forces. Siddhi Jauhar's army besieged Panhala in mid-1660, cutting off supply routes to the fort. During the bombardment of Panhala, Siddhi Jauhar purchased grenades from the British at Rajapur to increase his efficacy, and also hired some English artillerymen to bombard the fort, conspicuously flying a flag used by the English. This perceived betrayal angered Shivaji, who in December would exact revenge by plundering the English factory at Rajapur and capturing 4 of the factors, imprisoning them until mid-1663. Accounts vary as to the end of the siege, with some accounts stating that Shivaji escaped from the encircled fort and withdrew to Ragna, following which Adil Shah personally came to take charge of the siege, capturing the fort after 4 months. Other accounts state that after months of siege, Shivaji negotiated with Siddhi Jauhar and handed over the fort on the 22nd of September 1660, withdrawing to Vishalgarh. Shivaji would later retake Panhala in 1673. Battle of Pavan Kind. There is night movement to Vishalgarh and a sacrificial rear guard action to allow him to escape. Per these accounts, Shivaji withdrew from Panhala by cover of night, and as he was pursued by the enemy cavalry, his Maratha Sardar Baji Prabhu Deshpande of Bandal Deshmukh, along with 300 soldiers, volunteered to fight to the death to hold back the enemy at Ghod Kind, Horse Ravine, to give Shivaji and the rest of the army a chance to reach the safety of the Vishalgarh fort. In the ensuing Battle of Pavan Kind, the smaller Maratha force held back the larger enemy to buy time for Shivaji to escape. Baji Prabhu Deshpande was wounded but continued to fight until he heard the sound of cannon fire from Vishalgarh, signaling Shivaji had safely reached the fort, on the evening of the 13th of July 1660. Ghod Kind meaning, a narrow mountain pass, was later renamed Pavan Kind, Sacred Pass, in honor of Baji Prabhu Deshpande, Shibosing Jadhav, Kaloji, and all other soldiers who fought in there. Conflict with the Mughals. Until 1657, Shivaji maintained peaceful relations with the Mughal Empire. Shivaji offered his assistance to Aurangzeb, the Mughal viceroy of the Deccan and son of the Mughal emperor, in conquering Bijapur in return for formal recognition of his right to the Bijapuri forts and villages under his possession. Dissatisfied with the Mughal response, and receiving a better offer from Bijapur, he launched a raid into the Mughal Deccan. Shivaji's confrontations with the Mughals began in March 1657, when two of Shivaji's officers raided the Mughal territory near Ahmednagar. This was followed by raids in Junnar, with Shivaji carrying off 3 lakh in cash and 200 horses. Aurangzeb responded to the raids by sending Nasiri Khan, who defeated the forces of Shivaji at Ahmednagar. However, Aurangzeb's countermeasures against Shivaji were interrupted by the rainy season and his battle of succession with his brothers for the Mughal throne following the illness of the Emperor Shah Jahan. Attacks on Shaista Khan and Surat. Upon the request of Badi Begum of Bijapur, Aurangzeb, now the Mughal emperor, sent his maternal uncle Shaista Khan, with an army numbering over 150,000 along with a powerful artillery division in January 1660 to attack Shivaji in conjunction with Bijapur's army led by Sidi Jauhar. Shaista Khan, with his better equipped and provisioned army of 80,000 seized Pune and the nearby fort of Shakan, besieging it for a month and a half until breaching the walls. Shaista Khan pressed his advantage of having a larger, better provisioned and heavily armed Mughal army and made inroads into some of the Maratha territory, seizing the city of Pune and establishing his residence at Shivaji's palace of Lal Mahal. In April 1663, Shivaji launched a surprise attack on Shaista Khan in Pune. Accounts of the story differ in the popular imagination, but there is some agreement that Shivaji and band of some 200 followers infiltrated Pune, using a wedding procession as cover. They overcame the palace guards, breached the wall, and entered Shaista Khan's quarters, killing those they found there. Shaista Khan escaped, losing his thumb in the melee, but one of his sons and other members of his household were killed. The Khan took refuge with the Mughal forces outside of Pune, and Aurangzeb punished him for this embarrassment with a transfer to Bengal. In retaliation for Shaista Khan's attacks, and to replenish his now depleted treasury, in 1664 Shivaji sacked the port city of Surat, a wealthy Mughal trading center. Treaty of Purandar. The attack on Shaista Khan and Surat enraged Aurangzeb. In response he sent the Rajput Mirza Raja Jai Singh I with an army to defeat Shivaji. Throughout 1665, Jai Singh's forces pressed Shivaji, with their cavalry razing the countryside, and their siege forces investing Shivaji's forts. The Mughal commander succeeded in luring away several of Shivaji's key commanders, and many of his cavalrymen, into Mughal service. By mid-1665, with the fortress at Purandar besieged and near capture, Shivaji was forced to come to terms with Jai Singh. In the Treaty of Purandar, signed between Shivaji and Jai Singh on the 11th of June 1665, Shivaji agreed to give up 23 of his forts, keeping 12 for himself, and pay compensation of 4 lakh gold to the Mughals. Shivaji agreed to become a vassal of the Mughal Empire, and to send his son Sambhaji, along with 5,000 horsemen, as a Mansabdar to fight for the Mughals in the Deccan. Arrest in Agra and escape. In 1666, Aurangzeb summoned Shivaji to Agra along with his 9-year-old son Sambhaji. Aurangzeb's plan was to send Shivaji to Kandahar, now in Afghanistan, to consolidate the Mughal Empire's northwestern frontier. However, in the court, on the 12th of May 1666, Aurangzeb made Shivaji stand behind Mansabdars, military commanders, of his court. Shivaji took offense and stormed out of court, and was promptly placed under house arrest under the watch of Falad Khan, Kotwal of Agra. Shivaji's position under house arrest was perilous, as Aurangzeb's court debated whether to kill him or continue to employ him, and Shivaji used his dwindling funds to bribe courtiers to support his case. Orders came from the emperor to station Shivaji in Kabul, which Shivaji refused. Instead he asked for his forts to be returned and to serve the Mughals as a Mansabdar. Aurangzeb rebutted that he must surrender his remaining forts before returning to Mughal service. Shivaji managed to escape from Agra, likely by bribing the guards, though the emperor was never able to ascertain how he escaped despite an investigation. Popular legend, however, ascribes Shivaji's escape to a clever ruse, in which he smuggled himself and his son out of the house in large baskets claimed to be sweets to be gifted to religious figures in the town. Peace with the Mughals. After Shivaji's escape, hostilities with the Mughals ebbed, with Mughal Sardar Jaswant Singh acting as intermediary between Shivaji and Aurangzeb for new peace proposals. During the period between 1666 and 1668, Aurangzeb conferred the title of Raja on Shivaji. Sambhaji was also restored as a Mughal Mansabdar with 5,000 horses. Shivaji at that time sent Sambhaji with General Prataprao Gujar to serve with the Mughal viceroy in Aurangabad, Prince Muazzam. Sambhaji was also granted territory in Berar for revenue collection. Aurangzeb also permitted Shivaji to attack the decaying Adil Shahi. The weakened Sultan Ali Adil Shah II sued for peace and granted the rights of Sardashmukhi and Chauthai to Shivaji. Reconquest. The peace between Shivaji and the Mughals lasted until 1670. At that time Aurangzeb became suspicious of the close ties between Shivaji and Watsam, who he thought might usurp his throne, and may even have been receiving bribes from Shivaji. Also at that time, Aurangzeb, occupied in fighting the Afghans, greatly reduced his army in the Deccan. Many of the disbanded soldiers quickly joined Maratha service. The Mughals also took away the Jagiir of Berar from Shivaji to recover the money lent to him a few years earlier. In response to this situation, Shivaji launched an offensive against the Mughals and recovered a major portion of the territories surrendered to them in a span of 4 months. Shivaji sacked Surat for second time in 1670. The British and Dutch factories were able to repel his attack, but he managed to sack the city itself, including plundering the goods of a Muslim prince from Mawara and Narho was returning from Mecca. Angered by the renewed attacks, the Mughals resumed hostilities with the Marathas, sending a force under Dod Khan to intercept Shivaji on his return home from Surat, but were defeated in the Battle of Vani Dindori near present-day Nashik. In October 1670, Shivaji sent his forces to harass the English at Bombay, as they had refused to sell him war materiel. His forces blocked Bombay's woodcutting parties. In September 1671, Shivaji sent an ambassador to Bombay, again seeking materiel, this time for the fight against Danda Rajpuri. The English had misgivings of the advantages Shivaji would gain from this conquest, but also did not want to lose any chance of receiving compensation for his looting their factories at Rajapur. The English sent Lieutenant Stephen Ustick to treat with Shivaji, but negotiations failed over the issue of the Rajapur indemnity. Numerous exchanges of envoys followed over the coming years, with some agreement as to the arms issues in 1674, but Shivaji was never to pay the Rajapur indemnity before his death, and the factory there dissolved at the end of 1682. Battles of Amrani and Nisari. In 1674, Prataprao Gujar, the commander-in-chief of the Maratha forces, was sent to push back the invading force led by the Bijapuri general, Balal Khan. Prataprao's forces defeated and captured the opposing general in the battle, after cutting off their water supply by encircling a strategic lake, which prompted Balal Khan to sue for peace. In spite of Shivaji's specific warnings against doing so, Prataprao released Balal Khan, who started preparing for a fresh invasion. Shivaji sent a displeased letter to Prataprao, refusing him audience until Balal Khan was recaptured. Upset by his commander's rebuke, Prataprao found Balal Khan and charged his position with only 6 other horsemen, leaving his main force behind. Prataprao was killed in combat. Shivaji was deeply grieved on hearing of Prataprao's death, and arranged for the marriage of his second son, Rajaram, to Prataprao's daughter. Anandrao Mohite became Hambarao Mohite, the new Sarnaobat commander-in-chief of the Maratha forces. Raigad Fort was newly built by Hiroji Indulkar as a capital of nascent Maratha kingdom. Coronation. The coronation of Shivaji. Shivaji had acquired extensive lands and wealth through his campaigns, but lacking a formal title he was still technically a Mughal Zamindar, the son of an Bijapuri Jagirdar, with no legal basis to rule his de facto domain. A kingly title could address this and also prevent any challenges by other Maratha leaders, to whom he was technically equal. Controversy erupted amongst the Brahmins of Shivaji's court. They refused to crown Shivaji as a king because that status was reserved for those of the Kshatriya, warrior, Varna in Hindu society. Shivaji was descended from a line of headmen of farming villages, and the Brahmins accordingly categorized him as being of the Shudra cultivator, Varna. They noted that Shivaji had never had a sacred thread ceremony, and did not wear the thread, which a Kshatriya would. Shivaji summoned Gaga Bhatt, a Pandit of Varanasi, who stated that he had found a genealogy proving that Shivaji was descended from the Sisodia Rajputs, and thus indeed a Kshatriya, albeit one in need of the ceremonies befitting his rank. To enforce this status, Shivaji was given a sacred thread ceremony, and remarried his spouses under the Vedic rites expected of a Kshatriya. Shivaji was crowned king of the Marathas in a lavish ceremony at Raigad on 6 June 1674. In the Hindu calendar it was on the 13th day of the first fortnight of the month of Jyeshthain the year 1596. Gaga Bhatt officiated, holding a gold vessel filled with the 7 sacred waters of the rivers Yamuna, Indus, Ganges, Godavari, Krishna and Kaveri over Shivaji's head, and chanted the Vedic coronation mantras. After the ablution, Shivaji bowed before Jijabai and touched her feet. Nearly 50,000 people gathered at Raigad for the ceremonies. Shivaji was entitled Shakakarta, founder of an era, and Chatrapati, paramount sovereign. He also took the title of protector of the Hindu faith. Shivaji's mother Jijabai died on the 18th of June 1674. The Marathas summoned Bengalidantrik Goswami Nishal Puri, who declared that the original coronation had been held under inauspicious stars, and a second coronation was needed. This second coronation on the 24th of September 1674 had a dual use, mollifying those who still believed that Shivaji was not qualified for the Vedic rites of his first coronation, by performing a less contestable additional ceremony. Conquest in southern India. Beginning in 1674, the Marathas undertook an aggressive campaign, raiding Khandesh, October, capturing Bijapuri Ponda, April 1675, Karwar, mid-year, and Kolhapur, July. In November the Maratha navy skirmished with the cities of Hanhira, but failed to dislodge them. 59. Having recovered from an illness, and taking advantage of a conflict between the Afghans and Bijapur, Shivaji raided Athani in April 1676. In the run-up to his expedition, Shivaji appealed to a sense of Deccani patriotism, that southern India was a homeland that should be protected from outsiders. His appeal was somewhat successful, and in 1677 Shivaji visited Hyderabad for a month and entered into a treaty with the Qutub Shah of the Golconda Sultanate, agreeing to reject his alliance with Bijapur and jointly oppose the Mughals. In 1677 Shivaji invaded Karnataka with 30,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry, backed by Golconda artillery and funding. Proceeding south, Shivaji seized the forts of Vellore and Ginji. The latter would later serve as a capital of the Marathas during the reign of his son Rajaram I. Shivaji intended to reconcile with his half-brother Venkoji, Ekoji I, Shahaji's son by his second wife, Tukubai, née Mohite, who ruled Tanjore, after Shahaji. The initially promising negotiations were unsuccessful, so whilst returning to Raigad, Shivaji defeated his half-brother's army on the 26th of November 1677 and seized most of his possessions in the Mysore plateau. Venkoji's wife Dipabai, whom Shivaji deeply respected, took up new negotiations with Shivaji, and also convinced her husband to distance himself from Muslim advisors. In the end, Shivaji consented to turn over to her and her female descendants many of the properties he had seized, with Venkoji consenting to a number of conditions for the proper administration of the territories and maintenance of Shivaji's future memorial, Samadhi. Death and succession. In late March 1680, Shivaji fell ill with fever and dysentery, dying around 3-5 April 1680 at the age of 52, on the eve of Hanuman Jayanti. Putalabai, the childless eldest of the surviving wives of Shivaji, committed sati by jumping into his funeral pyre. Another surviving spouse, Sakwarabai, was not allowed to follow suit because she had a young daughter. World's greatest emperor Chatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Shivaji Bansal was an Indian warrior king. Shivaji carved out an enclave from the declining Adilshahi Sultanate of Bijapur that formed the genesis of the Maratha Empire. In 1674, he was formally crowned as the Chatrapati of his realm at